what can I do this week that I couldn't do last week? Show you this, a physical copy of Tower of the Storm, albeit with a author pre-order watermark, which you'll be seeing more of if you join the live stream this Saturday, if you're watching this when it comes out, the 29th, for the official launch of this book, the final instalment in the 2016 first series in the Ragnarok Chronicles wider franchise, with then the previous 3 books linked down below if you haven't seen those yet. But not wasting too much time with this video on that, we'll just say hello and welcome to the Ragnarok Chronicles. My name is Dominic and this is the channel where we talk about the lore of the books that I am writing, or at the very least things that are tangential to that, as in this case. Since it is the Ragnarok Chronicles, and given plenty of things I've talked about before on the channel, we've also discussed mythology as kind of like the source material behind some of the ideas there. Although that's not necessarily to say that every myth that we talk about in its original form on this channel is directly linked to something in the books. Or it may still be, but not guaranteed. Nor, even within 55 total planned books, would I be able to cover everything across all the mythologies that will be being touched upon. Yet we'll discuss some things in broad strokes here regardless. The concept of this video is meant to be a spiritual successor to the video where I talked through an adventure of Thor's from the prose Edda, i.e. more than just talking about, myths and very brief overviews. It was actually reading from the source material in detail for an extended period of time, so one single story. For this, I reached out on Instagram in a story, again, link below if you're not following me there, and I asked, was there a specific extended myth that anyone would be interested in me talking through? Ideally not Norse, despite it being the Ragnarok Chronicles, to keep things varied. Of the responses that I received, one that I potentially could have gone with was looking into, I think, in his words, the conspiracy that humans had made dragons extinct. Not strictly a myth in the way I was thinking of it, but dragons are mythological. And I probably would have, been talking about this today if I had been able to find any specific details about that online. I only found one website, really, one page that kind of talked about it, but that wasn't really in the tone that I was looking for. So if you're watching this, the person who submitted that, I won't say your name just in case that counts as doxing, but if you're watching this, appreciate the suggestion, even if I'm not fully going with it. Anyone else, if you want to look into that yourself, said the potential of how dragons went extinct, look into it for your own. But as you're able to tell from the title and the thumbnail, we will instead be taking a different suggestion, which comes from Egyptian mythology. When talking about the tales of ancient Egypt, you may well have heard of Ra, the sun god. And, skipping over his backstory and origin and so forth, you have him initially as a ruler over Earth, but eventually he passed that down onto his son, who passed on to his son and so forth, until we got to Osiris, who was a leader of Earth who introduced to humanity concepts such as agriculture, and under him, therefore, there was a prosperous reign, albeit not a long one. We also at this time have him with a sister, Isis, whom hopefully me saying that name repeatedly throughout this video isn't going to, again, not that these monetized or anything, but as his sister, who is also his wife, again, I've commented on this before as well, but what is a thing in other mythologies as well, I do believe that the genealogies and family trees of gods in Egyptian mythology, that's where they're the most complicated, and it gets the most awkward when you're trying to sort them out in reinterpretations, identifying who descends from who and whatever. But yes, you have Osiris and Isis, both siblings and husband and wife, with then also another separate younger brother in turn, who is Seth. Seth, jealous of, all the success that Osiris was having reigning over Earth, killed him, basically out of jealousy, to claim the throne or the crown for himself. And having done that, he furthermore spread the parts of Osiris's body across the land. Isis, understandably, was very distraught about the death of her husband and went around the land, finding all of the respective pieces. Then, with the help of Anubis, in what was essentially the invention of mummification, those parts of the bodies were embalmed. Anubis went off and became like the god associated with the treatment of the dead or other mummies that came thereafter. Meanwhile, Isis, using her own magic, was able to briefly bring Osiris back from the dead. And in that interaction, she became pregnant with his child, after which then Osiris himself went back to the realm of the dead, whereby henceforth he is the god of the underworld. But Isis, now pregnant with the boy who would be Horus, thus we have the introduction of the second name in the title of the video. So she went away to hide in Chemis, where she eventually gave birth to him with the aid of a different goddess, Hathor, who in turn, again, genealogies, is related to Ra. So would she be like Horus's great aunt removed however many times? I don't know. But she was there because she's like a wet nurse role connected to childbirth and all of that. Once Horus was old enough, Isis then brought him to the Council of Other Gods to basically say that this is Osiris's rightful heir. The crown of Earth should be taken away from Seth and given to Horus. A lot of the gods agreed with this, because it's father to son, it makes sense, rather than going to the brother/uncle. Of course, in opposition was Seth himself. He didn't want to give up the crown, but also then Ra. For a while, up until this point, as I say, the rulership of Earth had been directly passed down from father to son, father to son. He didn't think that this position should be given over to what is still relatively a young boy, as opposed to the fully established Seth. This wasn't a matter that was settled quickly, as we'll get on to discovering later, but just in these initial discussions, Isis wasn't backing down. The other gods still agreed with this position. Meanwhile, Ra very much didn't appreciate people disagreeing with his view of things, and Seth got so affronted, again, because he's potentially going to lose his position of power, he gets to the point where he threatens the life of the other gods, saying that for every day that Isis was allowed to still remain in the court thereafter, he would kill one of their number. At this stage, Ra commanded that all of the other gods would reconvene on an island in the middle of the Nile, except for Isis. She was barred from joining them there. And that was the instruction given to Nemti, who is the ferryman across that river. So they're all over there. Meanwhile, after a little bit of time, Isis uses her magic, this time to disguise herself as an old crone. With this illusion in place, she approaches Nemti and basically says that she is the wife of the cowherd over on the island who has been working there for the last 5 days, and she's here to bring him more provisions. Now, Nemti didn't suspect her of who she really was, but initially, nevertheless, didn't want to grant her passage on the boat anyway. That was until she managed to bribe him with a gold ring, at which point she indeed managed to rejoin the rest of the gods. Although, once parting with Nemti, and before meeting everyone else kind of on the shore of the island, she changed her appearance anew, this time appearing as a younger widow. Seth, being of a certain character, took the bait and made a point of talking with this widow, shall we say, and as part of this, he was asking him, who is she and why is she here? She tells a story of being the widow of a cowherd who had borne that cowherd's son, but when her husband had died, rather than the cattle passing on to the son, instead a stranger had stepped in and seized them all, and now wouldn't allow that son to, take what should be rightfully his. And she's asking Seth, well, can you put this right? Can you grant me justice? Well, at this, Seth just brushes off, well, how is it possible that a stranger can just come in and take what should be the son's by all right, what should pass father to son. Well, that's all that Isis needed, and swooping away to where the other gods are, revealing herself, she points out Seth for being the hypocrite that he is. He has just judged himself. Indeed, no one should be able to just step in and take what rather rightfully should be passed down to the son. At this stage, all of the other gods agree that yes, no, the crown should properly be passed down to Horus. Seth still isn't going to agree to this, so even if officially he has lost his crown, he doesn't view himself as beaten. Speaking with Ra, he gets that higher god to allow Seth and Horus to combat one another, and the nature of this being that they each respectively would transform into a hippopotamus, and they would fight in the river for 3 months, and whoever made it out on the other side of those 3 months would be the one to rightfully take the crown. This combat wasn't allowed to see itself through properly, however, as Isis sought to intervene. She created a magical harpoon and made to throw it into the hide of Seth's hippopotamus form. However, because of all the water churning and to combating each other, the harpoon instead hit Horus. Taking the harpoon back to make another attempt, she now this time does succeed in hitting Seth, at which point he proclaims, "Why are you always my enemy? You are my sister, you should be on my side." This is not to say that Isis suddenly concluded no, her son should not take the crown that should be his by birthright. However, this invoking of their sibling relationship does prompt her to stop attacking Seth in this instance. Horus doesn't take this too well. Seeing this as his mother betraying him, he takes a copper knife and cuts off her head, then subsequently taking it away into the wilderness. Now, Isis, being magical, as we've already established, she is able to grow a new head and she's fine. In fact, she forgives her son for this moment of anger. However, the other gods don't see it this way, especially Ra. Ra is furious when he hears about what Horus has done, and so orders the rest to go and hunt him down. It's Seth who ends up finding Horus, and in their confrontation, Seth removes his eyes, tears them out, and then leaves him there blinded in the desert, after which he conveniently doesn't tell any of the other gods that he found him. From their point of view, Horus remained lost. And so he would have remained, his eyes in fact planted in the sand and blooming into lotuses. However, then came along Hathor, who, having raised him from when he was a baby, still definitely had unwavering loyalty to him and took care of him. So she took the milk from a passing gazelle, used that to anoint his eye sockets, and ultimately enabled him to restore his sight. Once better again, Horus confronted the gods once more and reveals to them, what Seth had done to him, the grievous injury that he had inflicted. The problem is that while the gods did recognise that what Seth did was very much wrong, Horus is also still in the wrong for having beheaded his mother. No one is liking either of them at this point. This ultimately prompting Ra to order that they have a truce, ceasefire, to stop this needless fighting. Officially, that would have been that. The two of them would indeed stop clashing with one another for the crown. However, that's not really what happened. There were a couple of other instances between them in private, which I am not going to go through because they're not topics I want to talk about on this channel, but say the rivalry continued, at which point eventually Seth's next challenge was that they would each make stone boats, and whichever would sail best along the river, they would be the one to take crown over rulership of Earth. Now, you may realise that making a stone boat won't necessarily, well, it depends on how you do it, but to negate some of the potential risks in doing this, what Horus actually did is he built his main body out of pine and then just covered the outside to look like it was solid stone. Seeing what Horus had made and believing the facade to one-up him, Seth then chopped off the top of a mountain and just plonked that upturned in the river to sail upon it. Thus their race would have begun, but because he is literally just inside the top of a mountain, Seth's sank, whereas Horus's didn't. Infuriated, potentially humiliated, Seth reverted to his hippopotamus form as if to, well, not as if to, in order to lunge at Horus, to which Horus, nonplussed, simply conjured up a harpoon of his own, like what his mother did previously, meaning to stab Seth. The other gods prevented him from doing this, however, keeping the two of them apart. So, yet again, despite this other official challenge to settle this matter once and for all, still no answer has been reached, well, that everyone is accepting. Very much tired of this, Horus went to visit Neith, a revered goddess of wisdom, just saying that we have been at this for 80 years, which is where now, as I said, we would see how long this goes on for. And, I have won this over and over again, thousands of times, yet Seth still refuses to accept this. What can I do? The answer to this doesn't actually come from Neith. Rather, when the other gods overhear this plea and understand that Horus wants this over as much as they do, they start to understand and try to come up with ideas of their own, and it's Thoth who proposes that actually Ra should go to see Osiris in the underworld, being the father/brother of the two quarrelling parties. Thus, Ra indeed undertakes a perilous journey down into that underworld to see Osiris, who, unsurprisingly, is on the side of Horus in this matter, he being his son. It's not as simple as that, though, as none of this is. For on hearing about everything that's been happening in the world of the living, Osiris is furious that the other gods even allowed this to go on for so long. Of course, the rulership of Earth should have gone on to his son Horus. Why was this ever in question? Why should Seth have been allowed to keep the crown throughout all of this for decades? As has been seen before, Ra does not appreciate someone taking a bad attitude or disagreeing with him, yet nevertheless Osiris is the one who has the last word here, pointing out that being the god of the underworld, he has at his disposal so many powerful demons that he could set upon the world of the living if the other gods don't do as he says and instate Horus officially. With this threat of an invasion of the dead, even Seth backs down at this point. Everyone accepts that, yes, Horus henceforth would be, at least for that set of generations, the ruler of the people. Seth is given a sort of compensation nevertheless. He is invited to join Ra on his journey through the skies, where he would act as the source for storms and lightning. To now, slightly more tangentially, explore that journey of Ra himself. So as he's going around being the sun god during the day, he is going across the sky, and in order to do that, he is travelling in Madjet, which is a barque, a sort of ship. Meanwhile, after dusk, once he goes into night, at this point he gets into a different boat, the Horemakhet, which takes him through the underworld, which is then especially where the other people on the boat with him, such as Seth, come in handy, for in doing so, he has to, every night, challenge the likes of Apophis, the serpent of darkness, as well as a perilous journey. Although when he does come out through that peril each time, he then, with Osiris, this demonstrating a reconciliation between the two of them despite their earlier disagreement, they restore each other's power for the next cycle. So Osiris gives power back to Ra, and Ra gives power back to Osiris. If for a second we dare to think that these mythologies aren't actually happening and we're more having them as being stories told by just the regular people of Egypt, Some may see this as having been implemented into the narrative as a sign of, at a given time, the cult surrounding Ra and the cult surrounding Osiris were at odds with each other. And as I say, this detail was put in as a way of trying to get the two cults to agree with one another, at least on some basis. But of course, say that's looking into it in too much of a denier's point of view, is that we have our gods here, they're restoring each other, and thus then come the dawn, which is where I've taken the poetic license for the title of the video, Dawn of Dawn, as well as being a play on the Batman v Superman. We wouldn't have this dawn working as it does if we hadn't had all the prior stuff with Osiris going on and him ending up in the underworld to begin with. As we get through the dawn and now up over the sky, depending on who you ask, it might be seen that Ra isn't in a consistent state during this daytime travel. It's more consistent that by the time we get to midday and beyond, he is Ra in his usual form, yet more around the beginning of the arc. To some, he would rather be Khepri, which is more of a dung beetle form, whereas to others, they would refer to this form of Ra as Ra-Horakhty, which is an amalgamation of Ra and Horemakhet. Horemakhet himself being an incarnation of Horus. Thus, despite Seth, seemingly getting in his compensation something else, he still hasn't escaped the presence of his rival. With that, we come to the end of this particular story. Obviously, the characters keep on going on thereafter, just like with the Thor story, as expected, but this narrative of rivalry over correct kingship has been settled. Another note I'd just like to make, because we're here, is from what I've read, in terms of timekeeping in the ancient Egyptian calendar, days and nights were always split up into exactly 12 hours each, regardless of the season. So what that meant was that throughout the year, hours weren't consistent lengths. You would go from, say in the summer, having in the day really long hours, so it's 12, and then really short hours at night for the shorter nights. Meanwhile, in the winter, in the day, because the day is shorter, hours are shorter to fit the 12 in, whereas at night they become longer again. This would have had practical issues in terms of timekeeping or whatever, but that's how they chose to do it. The other reference to time I could give, because, of course I'm going to do it in 2 days' time, if you're watching this when this comes out, then we have the release of this, the proper version of it. This is the last of the set of 4 that are going into this first series of the Chronicles, which, if you don't know about, just watch other videos on the channel, especially the earliest ones, although I'd like to think maybe I've slightly improved since then, so I don't know. But anyway, it would mean a lot if, don't jump straight to this if you haven't read the others yet. As I said, the Gift of the Man-Sin, the Ark of Angels, Celestial Coup, all before that, which you can find on Amazon. I have specific videos on this channel talking about those in non-spoilery overview terms. If you want to get more taste for them, obviously you've got blurbs as well. Join me on that Saturday itself at noon till 2 British time, as we, as per usual, just have our live stream. Hopefully no technical issues this time. Of course, I'm jinxing it there, but we're reading some extracts from it, having some behind-the-scenes talking with you in the chat in general, just marking the occasion, because of course, as I say, I've got plans to write plenty more after this, but with no specific time scale. I chose that this year, every 3 months, I'd release a book, not because I thought people are going to keep up with that in terms of reading, but because, as I've said previously, why artificially extend the wait time? If you've read the first books and enjoyed them or want to get on to the next ones, they're already there for you. And so, yeah, I've managed to do this every 3 months because I have the manuscripts basically already there, although they have all of them undergone revisions in the lead-ups to their releases. But the point is, the next books aren't... Well, I've written a little bit, so there's a different video I'll link up there to me talking about that, but the point is, it'll be a while yet. So join in for the live stream, because I don't know when the next one's going to be for a while. I've basically said the same thing over and over again. Yes, you can, for that, make sure you stick around with the channel, so you can subscribe if you want to do that. If you want to help me get the word of the books out to more people, you can share the video or share the other ones more specifically to do with the book, live stream, or look around the channel, you find which ones may prefer to watch. If you liked the video, hit the like button, or if you've got any other comments, like for instance, as I said, the inspiration for this one came from a response to a question in an Instagram story. Have you got other, kind of myths that you'd be interested in me doing videos like this, just talking through generally? Either way, whatever you choose to do, because whatever you do is entirely up to you. The main thing is to always remember to just keep on telling stories.